The story I'm about to share is one I should wear like a badge of honor. It's a tale of unfathomable courage, heart-wrenching loss, and decisions forged in the heat of chaos. Yet, it's also a fragment of my past I buried deep, a memory hazy from trauma and time. What I remember is vivid, up to a certain point. The lead-up is crystal clear. But the event itself and its aftermath are a series of disjointed images, a broken reel of emotions and noise. Some of these details came to me later, through the eyes and words of others, my squad leader, my commanding officer, and the official reports. This isn't just my story, it's theirs too. The mission seemed straightforward. Load up a convoy of transport rigs with cyber medical supplies and high-frequency signal nodes, then deliver it to a remote outpost that desperately needed them. As the designated cyber medic for 2nd Unit, the inventory was my responsibility, while my unit leader took charge of the signal equipment. We prepped for hours, ensuring every piece of tech and every stim cartridge was accounted for. Midway through, I stopped my sergeant. "Should I bring extra thermals?" "My mag slots are already stretched thin," I asked, motioning to the hover transport's side compartments. He paused, calculating, then called over to a nearby operative. "Hey, you packing extra rounds?" The soldier shook his head. "Negative. All full, Chief." My sergeant turned back to me. "Take what you can, Vane. Never hit the road understocked." His grin was faint, but enough to ease the tension. We shared a quiet chuckle before I went to grab a couple more energy packs for the ARC-12, my pulse rifle. By the time we were ready to roll out, the convoy was a lean formation of 4 armored hover transports loaded with precious tech. We'd recently lost a few operatives in prior ops, so our numbers were lighter than usual. Still, the plan was simple: travel through the craggy wasteland, deliver the goods, collect the signature, and return. Routine, at least on paper. I'd heard we'd pass near the Vertigo Crests, a rare stretch of green, lush with overgrowth in a world otherwise barren. It was as beautiful as it was dangerous, known to house rogue nomads and militant scavengers. This region wasn't just a no-man's land, it was a crucible of survival. As we prepped, someone plugged a data shard into the transport's ancient sound module. Through the static, an old Earth track sputtered to life, a Creedence classic. I snapped my head toward the sound. "Turn that cursed tune off before you jinx us," I barked, half laughing. That track was an anthem of combat, not of supply runs. The soldier rolled his eyes and switched to something heavier, a rock track from 3 Days Grace. It was enough to keep the crew in good spirits as we glided over the cracked terrain. The route, if you could call it that, was watched closely by our recon drones. The corridor was our main link between the hubs, but halfway through, we'd veer off to a treacherous offshoot path leading to the outpost. We were drilled to keep our eyes sharp for threats, scav traps, IED drones, or any suspicious debris. The briefing hammered home one thing: stay on the path. Straying off course was practically inviting disaster. It was midday when we decided to recharge. We activated the thermal shields, popped open nutrient packs, and exchanged offbeat banter while blasting music. I can't recall what I ate, probably a bland protein gel. We laughed, sang off-key, and almost forgot where we were for a fleeting moment. Then the calm sparked to life. "Eyes up, team." Transitioning to the off-road path. Transport 2, reduce speed. Transport 1, maintain lead and report any anomalies. Over. I tightened my grip on my rifle as our squad leader shot a glance back at us. "If the shitstorm hits, one of you better take the turret without hesitation," he said, his voice calm but firm. The air shifted. The laughter and humanity drained, leaving only the sound of hums and clicks as we armed ourselves for the unknown. Every detail etched itself into my mind. A jagged boulder shaped like a child hunched over, the skeletal remains of an ancient tree, a small pothole in the dirt that seemed misplaced. Each one could be nothing or everything. Before I could warn my unit leader, we'd already passed the suspicious spot without incident. My mind logged every detail like a neural archive, yet nothing happened. The sky above was an endless expanse of brilliant blue, unmarred by a single cloud. The relentless glare of the sun hammered down on the armored hulls of our hover transports. Every vibration, Every metallic creak and groan from the machinery felt amplified, my instincts on overdrive. You couldn't afford to miss a thing. Good pace so far. Keep those optics sharp, came the calm but firm command over comms. My heart jolted as my gaze caught something, a shadow, a movement, maybe even a figure, but when I twisted around in my seat, there was nothing there. The soldier seated next to me nudged my arm, his voice a low murmur. "Astra, you good?" he asked, concern etched into his features. I nodded quickly, even though my throat felt dry as desert sand. "Yeah, I'm good," I lied. "Transport 1, status?" crackled a voice through the comms. The response came with a hint of casual levity. "All clear up ahead. Saw some livestock. Any takers on roast mutton tonight?" A few stifled chuckles broke the tension, but the humor didn't last long. "Knock it off." Eyes forward, came the sharp retort. "Roger that," the lead replied, their tone sobering immediately. The static faded, leaving us with the ever-present hum of the engines and the rhythmic clunking as we navigated uneven terrain. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. A deafening roar split the air, and the ground shuddered violently beneath us. The lead transport exploded in a blinding fireball, flipping into the air before crashing down as a mangled heap of metal. The shockwaves slammed through us, grinding our vehicle to an abrupt halt. Everything went dark. There's no way to describe the terror of waking up in a storm of destruction. My eyes fluttered open to a surreal scene, the sky above spinning, or maybe it was me. My ears rang, but the distant cacophony of gunfire, explosions, and desperate shouting began to penetrate the fog. Reality forced its way in, harsh and unrelenting. "Medic! We need a medic!" A scream pierced through the haze, yanking me fully into the moment. I realized I'd been dragged behind the twisted wreckage of one of the transports, my combat vest pulling tight against my chest. My surroundings sharpened, the remains of our convoy in ruins, 3 separate blasts having hit their marks. The first transport had been obliterated. Ours had been hit moments later. The final vehicle wasn't spared either. We were trapped, boxed in by the attacks. A shadow loomed above me, and I looked up to see my squad leader's face. His expression was a mixture of terror and fury. "Astra, get up, now," he yelled. The realization struck me like a shock module to the chest. We're under attack. My mind snapped into action. I hauled myself to my feet just as the shriek of a rocket cut through the air, detonating nearby with an earth-shaking boom. Instinctively, I dove for cover as debris rained down around us. "Astra, he's down," my squad leader shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the chaos. Following his gaze, I spotted our transport's driver sprawled out in the open, crimson pooling beneath him. My heart thudded as adrenaline surged through me. There was no time to think. Ignoring orders, I bolted from cover. The sharp cracks of rifle fire and the whistle of bullets cutting through the air didn't register, only the soldier lying vulnerable ahead of me. I dove forward, sliding onto my stomach and crawling the last few feet to his side. His face was pale, his body unnervingly still, but he was alive. Grabbing his vest, I used every ounce of strength to drag him toward the cover of a jagged rock formation. Each step felt like an eternity as bullets struck the dirt around us, spraying sand and debris into the air. When we reached the safety of the rocks, I collapsed beside him, panting but focused. "Stay with me, damn it," I snapped, shaking his shoulders as his head lolled weakly. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow. Blood gushed from a wound in his lower thigh, every pulse sending out a fresh spurt. An arterial hit. I cursed under my breath, my hands already moving. Tearing open the damaged fabric of his combat pants, I winced at the severity of the wound. My cybernetic interface flickered faintly, scanning the injury and flashing critical warnings. "Hold on," I muttered, yanking a tourniquet from my medkit. Wrapping it tightly around his upper leg, I cranked it down hard, my own pulse racing as I tried to control the bleeding. The storm of chaos around us faded into a dull roar, my entire world narrowing to the man in front of me and the battle to keep him alive. The air was alive with chaos bullets slicing through it in every direction. The battle behind me dissolved into muffled echoes. For a moment, it was just me and the wounded soldier before me. Stop the bleeding, Astra. Stay focused. The tourniquet did its job partially, but it wasn't enough. I reached into my medkit, pulling out gauze and sealant packs to stabilize the injury as best I could. My heart raced as I patted the bag down. Shit. A lot of my gear must have been lost when our transport was hit. Stay with me. Damn it, I muttered, my voice trembling but resolute. I glanced over the edge of our rocky cover. My squad leader was motioning wildly, pointing toward the mounted plasma turret. The weapon was finally online and raining synthetic hellfire on the ridgeline, forcing the enemy to duck for cover. It was my chance. Gripping the soldier's vest, I dragged him across the scorched ground toward the remnants of the convoy. He's not gonna make it. I shouted as I neared the wreckage, the tension in my voice barely masking my desperation. Somewhere in the chaos, an enemy sniper locked onto me, their scope trained steadily on my chest. They exhaled, pulling the trigger with cold precision. The shot hit me like a thunderstrike. I was thrown backward, the impact slamming me into the dirt. My chest plate absorbed the brunt of the sniper's round, but I knew from the jarring pain radiating through my body that ribs had snapped, maybe worse. Gasping for air, I tried to move, but my body protested. My vision blurred as I felt hands grabbing my vest, dragging me back toward cover. Astra! Astra! Someone yelled, their voice cutting through the haze. I weakly raised a hand, a thumbs up, signaling I was still alive. Then came the metallic thunk. A grenade had landed in the dirt near the wrecked hover transport. I watched in horrified awe as one of the soldiers sprinted toward it, throwing himself onto the explosive without hesitation. The muffled blast reverberated through the battlefield, his sacrifice shielding me, the wounded, and our squad leader from certain death. The sergeant's voice was sharp in my ear. You've got to move. There are more down, he shouted, reloading his rifle. I scanned the convoy's remains. At least 5 bodies lay scattered, some motionless, others struggling. The distance between us and them was an open field of death. Fuck it. Cover me. I shouted back. I bolted from cover, every step a gamble against the bullets tearing through the air. An explosion erupted in front of me, the shockwave throwing me against the side of a transport. My vision swam, but I forced myself to crawl toward the nearest body. Reaching him, I checked his pulse, weak but present. Flipping him onto his back, I tore open his chest plate to reveal a sucking wound in his torso. Damn it, I whispered, my fingers trembling as I fumbled through my medkit. My hands found a chest vent, its sealant edges still intact. Pressing it against the wound, I activated its vacuum function, stabilizing the pressure in his lungs. His breathing evened out slightly, but my mind was already racing ahead. The turret above roared briefly, then fell silent. Looking up, I saw the gunner slumped forward in his seat, blood pouring from his shoulder. I hauled myself up into the transport, yanking the man free. I'm hit! Fuck, he screamed, his face contorted in agony. The injury was catastrophic, his arm hung by threads of tendon, rendering it useless. You're not dying today, I muttered through gritted teeth, more to myself than to him. Wrapping a makeshift tourniquet around his shoulder was an agonizing task for both of us, but it held. I injected a dose of morphine into his neck and growled, "Stay put. Don't fucking move." Leaving him on the floor, I leapt out of the transport, landing hard on the uneven ground. The pain in my chest flared, a sharp reminder of my fractured ribs. A streak of light whistled past my head, a damn RPG. It slammed into the dirt a few meters away, erupting into a cloud of shrapnel and debris. I staggered through the haze, barely able to breathe. "Where's the comm node?" I screamed, my voice hoarse. A soldier nearby, his face streaked with blood and dust, pointed toward a body slumped near the wreckage. His cheek bore a crude bandage slapped hastily over a grazing wound. I sprinted toward the radio operator's lifeless form, my legs screaming in protest. Blood had pooled beneath him, soaking into the cracked earth. Dropping to my knees, I flipped him over and immediately knew it was too late. His neck was a torn mess, his pulse long gone. My stomach churned, but I couldn't afford to stop. Grabbing the comm unit, I slung it over my shoulder and turned toward the sergeant. He was crouched behind the next vehicle, providing suppressing fire. "I've got it," I yelled, stumbling as I forced my battered body forward. Every step felt like wading through a storm, the battle raging louder with each passing second. The radio pack buzzed faintly beneath a slick layer of blood, its operator lying lifeless beside it. I vaulted over the remains of a fallen transport, landing hard and damp, sticky sand soaked with crimson. The metallic tang of blood filled the air, and as I checked his pulse, my heart sank. It was non-existent. Flipping him over, I saw the mess where his neck used to be. The severed jugular told me everything I didn't want to know. He was gone. This wasn't just a comrade, he was one of my closest friends in the unit. The rage that surged through me felt like a jolt of raw electricity. They'd taken him from us, and it ignited something primal inside me. "Do you know how to work this damn thing?" I shouted to the nearest soldier, pointing at the blood-soaked comms pack. He shook his head, his expression hollow. I bit back another curse and snatched the radio off the ground, blood smearing across my gloves. Sprinting through the crossfire, I dodged bullets and debris, adrenaline fueling my battered body. The platoon sergeant was crouched behind the next vehicle, his rifle spitting bright plasma bolts. I skidded to a halt in front of him, shoving the comms pack into his hands. "Get U.S. air support, now," I gasped, collapsing against the wheel of the transport. My chest screamed in agony, and my breaths came shallow and ragged. "Astra, are you hit?" he barked, his voice tight with panic. I shook my head weakly, raising a trembling thumbs up. The movement made my ribs protest fiercely, and I fought to stay conscious. Somewhere in the chaos, a shout tore through the noise. "Medic! Over here!" Both the sergeant and I turned toward the sound. A specialist from the last transport was sprawled on the ground, writhing and screaming. Before the sergeant could stop me, I shoved him aside and bolted, ignoring the searing pain in my chest. Orders be damned. The enemy be damned. I staggered forward, nearly blacking out as I dropped my rifle into the sand and tore off my chest rig. Every breath felt like a knife stabbing into my lungs. When I hit the ground near the soldier, my vision was already narrowing. "Doc, my leg," he wailed, pointing with a trembling hand at what remained of it. The lower half was gone, ending in a mangled mess of flesh and torn fabric just below the knee. A grenade had taken the rest. My hands moved on autopilot, even as my body screamed for rest. I pulled out my last tourniquet, cinching it around his upper leg with trembling fingers. His cries of pain pierced through the haze of battle as I worked. Wrapping the stump in what little gauze and sealant I had left, I injected him with the last of my morphine. "It's all I've got," I muttered, collapsing beside him. My chest heaved as I fought to suck in air, my vision swimming. The world muted around me, and his voice faded to a muffled echo. "Doc, stay with me. Don't you fucking die." A sharp slap across my face snapped me back for a fleeting moment before the darkness closed in. I woke to the thunderous sound of gunships unleashing hell on the ridgeline. My head throbbed, and every inch of my body ached. The specialist I'd treated was still alive, barely clinging to consciousness beside me. "Fuck, Astra, I thought you were," he began, but I cut him off weakly. "Shut up," I groaned, trying to sit up. My ribs protested, sending a sharp reminder of their broken state. Peeking over the cover, I saw a Bradley tearing into the enemy positions, its cannons carving through the rubble. Soldiers poured out of the vehicle, rushing to secure the area and assist the wounded. The battle had lasted 3 grueling hours. It felt like an eternity. By the end, we'd lost 2 of our own, with 6 more injured to varying degrees. As the evac shuttle touched down, a med team swarmed in to take over. My squad leader helped me to my feet. "Go," he ordered, motioning toward the shuttle. I shook my head. "Not yet," I croaked, trying to push him off. But when I collapsed again, he didn't give me a choice. Hoisting me into a fireman's carry, he hauled me to the shuttle as I muttered weak protests. "See you back there," he shouted, sprinting back toward the battlefield. I watched through blurred vision as the remaining stragglers were obliterated under a rain of gunfire and explosives. The last thing I remembered was the hum of the shuttle's engines and the feel of hands pressing me onto a gurney before everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, shirtless and smeared with dried blood. My ribs ached with every shallow breath. A voice startled me. Holy shit, she's awake. My commanding officer's face came into view, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. Another voice followed, sharp and accusatory. You crazy motherfucker, my sergeant barked. I groaned, turning my head. The bruising on my chest had blossomed into a grotesque swirl of purple, yellow, and blue. The sergeant gestured toward it. 5 broken ribs, but no punctured lung. You're lucky. His tone was half admiration, half exasperation. You've got no idea what you just pulled off, do you? Mycio asked. I licked my dry lips and croaked, sorry. Sorry. The sergeant's voice rose. You saved every one of our asses out there. The CO placed a hand on his shoulder, calming him. Rest, Vane. We'll talk more when you're ready. I closed my eyes, letting the words fade into the background. All I felt was exhaustion and the faintest relief that we'd survived. Vane, get some rest. We'll debrief when you're ready, all right? My commanding officer said softly, his voice tinged with exhaustion. I nodded weakly and let my eyes close. My body felt like it had been run through an industrial press. My memories were fragments, scattered and elusive. The last thing I could recall was loading the convoy that morning. The rest? Just static. That's what multiple concussions will do to you, I suppose. A few days in the med bay passed in a blur of dull pain and quiet recovery. When I was finally cleared to return to my quarters, I braced myself for the inevitable questions. What I didn't expect was the roar of applause the moment I stepped through the door. The sound startled me, leaving me frozen in the doorway. My squad mates surrounded me, cheering like I'd just won the circuit derby. To be honest, I was terrified. Then my squad leader, with a grin that stretched ear to ear, ran up and threw his arms around me. Pain flared through my battered ribs and the arm now cradled in a sling, courtesy of the insurgent's precision. I shoved him off, groaning. Damn it, watch the hardware. I snapped, half laughing through the pain. Sorry. But she's back, boys. Someone get Astra a drink, he shouted over the commotion. Laughter erupted, and a cold can was pressed into my hand. I stared at it for a second before setting it down by my bunk. I didn't drink, not since the academy days. I sank onto my bed and rubbed my temples, my voice barely audible. What the hell happened out there? I asked, exhaustion heavy in my words. You seriously don't remember? Holy shit, Vane, my squad leader exclaimed. The others began piecing the story together for me, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mix of admiration, disbelief, and awe. Bits of memory trickled back, snippets of the battle, the heat of the explosions, the screams of the wounded. But most of it remained a foggy blur. I leaned back, closing my eyes against the pounding in my head. The sergeant slapped my shoulder gently, his voice filled with rare sincerity. Thank you, Vane. We'd have been done for without you out there. You might be new, but today, you're a fucking legend. One soldier started chanting, Vane, 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 until the entire room joined in. The sound rose to a deafening crescendo before fading into more laughter and conversation. I chuckled softly, though the feeling was bittersweet. My body was alive, but my mind lingered on those who weren't as lucky. I could still see his face, the radio operator, with his terrible jokes and knack for riling people up into faux intellectual debates that usually ended in playful insults. And then there was the soldier who dove onto the grenade. I hadn't known him well, only that he was from old Kentuck, loved spicy food, and had a family waiting for him back home. I kept their photos, along with those of the others we'd lost, in a hidden compartment of my tactical vest. It was my way of remembering them. But it was also my way of punishing myself, a constant reminder of my failure to save them. Once, after a long patrol, I confessed this to the chaplain. Vane, I know you're not one for spiritual matters, he said gently, resting a hand on my shoulder, but carrying their memory like this, it's not honoring them. They're at peace now, watching over you. You've got to find a way to live with the loss without letting it destroy you. Keep those pictures, but let them be a source of strength, not pain. I nodded awkwardly, but his words lingered. Despite his advice, I still saw those photos as my penance. They were the faces of the people I'd failed. And to me, that failure was the deepest wound I carried. Not long after, my commanding officer informed me that I'd been recommended for a Bronze Star with Valor and a Purple Heart. I accepted the news with quiet indifference. Medals, commendations, they meant little to me. I didn't need shiny trinkets or pieces of paper to remind me of what I'd endured. What I wanted was something no award could bring, the return of my comrades. Over time, I came to understand the harsh truth of what I'd signed up for. In the end, no amount of skill, technology, or luck could save everyone. Even now, the survivor's guilt weighs on me. Some days, it's a dull ache. Other days, it's a crushing weight. Why did I get to live while they didn't? What made me more deserving? But in my heart, I know they're the true heroes. They're the ones we must never forget. The weight of the past didn't fade, but the demands of the present pulled me forward. A few weeks after returning to active duty, I was assigned to a patrol mission near the edges of the city ruins, an area notorious for rogue scav gangs and hostile AI drones. The concrete jungle stretched endlessly, its crumbled towers jagged against the neon-lit sky. We moved in tight formation, our boots crunching against shattered glass and debris. The air smelled of ozone and decay, a reminder of the countless battles this place had seen. My cybernetic HUD flickered to life, feeding me data, movement pings, heat signatures, and the steady pulse of my squad mates' vitals. "Stay sharp," came the low growl of my squad leader. His voice carried the weight of experience, though I could sense his unease. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that pressed on your nerves. As we crept forward, my eyes scanned the shattered windows above us, my grip tightening on my weapon, a custom Novatech pulse rifle with integrated thermal targeting. It hummed faintly in my hands, a comforting reminder of its reliability. A sudden ping lit up my HUD. Movement. My cyber-optic zoomed in automatically, focusing on the heat trail of a figure darting between cover ahead. "Contact, 2 o'clock, 70 meters, I reported, my voice calm despite the adrenaline starting to spike in my veins. "Hostile?" one of the rookies asked, his voice betraying his nerves. "Unknown." "Let's find out," our leader replied. We advanced cautiously, the glow of our augmented visors cutting through the dimness. As we closed the distance, the heat signature flickered and vanished. My heart skipped a beat. "Lost visual," I said, scanning frantically. "Hold position," the leader ordered, raising a fist. Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath us erupted in a burst of blinding light and shrapnel. I was thrown backward, my ears ringing as my HUD flashed red warnings across my vision. My ribs, still healing, screamed in protest as I hit the ground. "Ambush!" someone shouted over the comms, their voice distant and distorted. The air was suddenly alive with chaos, gunfire, the whine of plasma bolts, and the roar of an automated turret ripping through the air above. I scrambled for cover, my breathing ragged as I assessed the situation. My HUD quickly tagged multiple hostiles emerging from the shadows, scavengers, their armor a patchwork of stolen tech and crude enhancements. My fingers danced over the controls on my rifle, switching to full auto. Leaning out from behind a crumbled wall, I opened fire, the weapon's recoil vibrating through my arms as I aimed for the nearest scav. He went down in a spray of sparks, his crude energy shield failing under the assault. "Vane, we're pinned down." "Move to flank," my leader barked over the comms. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and bolted to the side, weaving through the debris as bolts of plasma sizzled past me. My cybernetic legs absorbed the shock of my movements, propelling me faster than humanly possible. Reaching the enemy's flank, I activated a stun grenade and lobbed it into their formation. The device detonated with a crackling burst of EMP energy, disabling their weapons and momentarily blinding them. Taking advantage of the opening, I rushed in, my blade implant snapping into place with a metallic hiss. The fight turned up close and personal, the hum of my monofilament blade slicing through the air. One scav lunged at me, his jagged machete aimed for my chest. I sidestepped, slashing across his midsection with a precision strike. He crumpled, his cybernetic enhancements sparking as he fell. Behind me, the rest of the squad pressed forward, the tide of the battle shifting in our favor. The scavs, disoriented and outmatched, began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them. "Area secure," came the squad leader's voice after what felt like an eternity. I slumped against a wall, my breathing heavy as the adrenaline began to fade. My HUD reported minor injuries, nothing I couldn't handle, but the ache in my ribs reminded me that I wasn't invincible. "Nice work, Vane," the leader said, clapping me on the shoulder as he passed. I nodded, but my mind was already elsewhere. The ambush had been too precise, too well-coordinated for a group of common scavengers. Something about it didn't sit right. As we regrouped and prepared to move out, I caught a glint of something in the rubble, a small device, its sleek design out of place among the scavengers' crude equipment. Picking it up, I turned it over in my hand. A tracker. My stomach sank. "Boss, we've got a problem," I said, holding up the device. His face darkened as he took it from me, his expression grim. "Move out." "Double time," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. We made our way back to the rendezvous point, every step feeling heavier than the last. The tracker meant someone was watching us, someone far more organized and dangerous than the scavs we'd just fought. Back at the base, I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. Even as I cleaned my gear and checked my implants for damage, my mind raced with possibilities. Who was behind the ambush? And what did they want? The answers came sooner than I expected. The next day, we received orders to investigate a series of attacks on supply convoys in the same area. It didn't take long to connect the dots. The scavs were being supplied and coordinated by someone with resources and a grudge. Our mission was clear: find them, stop them, and make sure they never threatened us again. But as we prepared to head out, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than we realized. I wasn't ready for what we would uncover or how it would change everything. The transport bay hummed with activity as we prepared for the next mission. The oppressive tension in the air was hard to ignore, every soldier double-checking their gear in near silence. The mission briefing had been straightforward on the surface: track down the scavenger network responsible for the ambush and eliminate their base of operations. But everyone knew this wasn't just about scavengers anymore. That tracker had changed everything. I leaned against the wall, tightening the straps on my combat vest. The weight of my gear felt heavier today, though I wasn't sure if it was physical or just the creeping dread gnawing at my nerves. My squad leader approached, his expression grim. "You good to go, Vane?" I nodded, trying to push the unease aside. "I'm fine. Just ready to get this over with." He studied me for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Stay sharp out there. This isn't just another scav op." As the hover transports powered up, their engines emitting a low whine, I climbed aboard and secured myself in the seat. The squad filed in around me, the hum of conversation subdued. Most of them were seasoned fighters, but even they looked uneasy. Something about this mission felt different. The ride was uneventful, the barren landscape stretching out before us in endless shades of gray. As we approached the target zone, the transport's AI chimed in. Approaching destination. Preparing for drop. The ramp hissed open, and the first thing that hit me was the silence. Not the kind of silence you hear in peaceful places, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. The kind that tells you something's watching. We moved out in formation, the crunch of our boots against the rocky ground the only sound. The location was an abandoned industrial complex, its skeletal structures looming against the overcast sky. My HUD flickered with data, heat signatures, structural integrity scans, and proximity alerts. So far, nothing unusual. The first sign of trouble came as we entered the main building. A faint electrical hum echoed through the corridors, growing louder as we moved deeper inside. My cybernetic implants tingled, picking up subtle electromagnetic disturbances. "Anyone else getting interference?" I asked, my voice low. A few of the others nodded, their own HUDs glitching intermittently. My squad leader raised a hand, signaling us to hold position. Eyes open. Something's not right here. We advanced cautiously, the dim lighting casting eerie shadows across the walls. Then we found it, a makeshift command center in what used to be a factory floor. Computers and equipment were scattered across tables, their screens flickering with data. But it was the figure slumped in the chair at the center of the room that drew my attention. Approaching slowly, I kept my weapon trained on the figure. It was a man, or what was left of him. His body was riddled with cybernetic implants, wires snaking out from his skull and torso. His eyes, glazed and lifeless, stared at a screen displaying a stream of code. "Looks like someone didn't make it," one of the rookies muttered, but my instincts told me otherwise. "No," I said, stepping closer. "This isn't scav work." Before I could examine him further, my HUD lit up with warnings. Heat signatures, multiple, closing in fast. "Contacts inbound," I shouted, spinning around as the first shots rang out. The room erupted into chaos, plasma bolts and kinetic rounds ricocheting off the walls. Figures emerged from the shadows, their movements unnervingly precise. They weren't scavengers. Their armor was sleek, their weapons advanced. Whoever they were professionals. I dove behind cover, my pulse rifle snapping to life as I returned fire. My shots found their mark, taking down one of the attackers, but more kept coming. My squad fought back fiercely, but the enemy was coordinated, their tactics relentless. "Fall back," the squad leader yelled, but retreating was easier said than done. The enemy had us boxed in, their fire cutting off our exit routes. My cybernetics flared, adrenaline pumping through my system as I activated my tactical overlay. Time seemed to slow as I analyzed the battlefield, marking weak points in the enemy's formation. "Follow me," I shouted, breaking from cover and weaving through the chaos. My squad followed, covering each other as we pushed toward the far side of the room. Reaching the door, I hacked into the control panel, my cybernetic interface overriding the security lock. The door hissed open, and we spilled into a narrow corridor, slamming it shut behind us. "Keep moving," the squad leader barked, and we sprinted down the corridor, the sound of pursuit close behind. The next few minutes were a blur of gunfire and narrow escapes. We navigated the maze-like complex, trying to outmaneuver our attackers. My lungs burned, my ribs aching with every breath, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Finally, we emerged into an open courtyard, the cold air a stark contrast to the suffocating heat inside. But our relief was short-lived. Standing in the center of the courtyard was a figure unlike any I'd ever seen. Tall and imposing, its body was a seamless blend of flesh and machine, its armor reflecting the faint glow of the overhead lights. It held a massive weapon, a hybrid of a railgun and a flamethrower, its barrel humming with energy. "Scatter," the squad leader yelled, but the figure moved faster than we could react. Its weapon fired, a devastating blast tearing through the courtyard. I dove behind a crumbled wall, my ears ringing from the explosion. Peeking out, I fired at the figure, but its armor absorbed the shots effortlessly. It turned toward me, its weapon charging for another attack. My mind raced, searching for any weakness. Then I saw it, a small panel on its back, exposed when it shifted. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Cover me," I yelled, breaking from cover and sprinting toward the figure. My squad unleashed a barrage of fire, distracting it just long enough for me to get close. I slid behind it, pulling a grenade from my belt and shoving it into the exposed panel. Diving away, I hit the ground as the grenade detonated, a deafening explosion ripping through the air. When the dust settled, the figure was motionless, its weapon sparking and smoking. I let out a shaky breath, my body trembling from the adrenaline. But the victory was short-lived. My HUD picked up more heat signatures, dozens of them, approaching fast. "We've got company," I said, my voice grim. The squad regrouped, preparing for the next wave. As the sounds of approaching enemies grew louder, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in way over our heads. Whoever these people were, they weren't scavengers. They were something far more dangerous. And they weren't going to stop until we were all dead. We were heading back to the base after the mission, my body feeling heavier with each step. The dull ache in my ribs from past encounters was manageable, but there was something else, a deeper sensation I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just physical, something inside me felt off. I'd been ignoring it for weeks, chalking it up to stress and exhaustion, but it was getting harder to dismiss. When we reached the base, my squad leader gave me a once-over, his expression a mix of concern and irritation. "Vane, go see the medics. You look like you've been hit by a truck," he said, tossing me a bottle of water. I rolled my eyes but nodded. He wasn't wrong. Still, it took me a couple of hours to head to the medbay. First, I had to finish the gear checks, submit the mission report, and ensure my rifle was properly calibrated. It was only when I had no excuses left that I made my way down the dimly lit corridors to the medical wing. Dr. Moore was on duty, her sharp eyes narrowing as she saw me walk in. "You're finally here. I was starting to think you were indestructible," she said, motioning for me to sit. I smirked faintly. "Not quite. Just busy. It's probably nothing, ribs still sore, that's all." She arched an eyebrow, not buying it. "Let's check anyway. You soldiers have a nasty habit of underplaying injuries." Her scanner lit up, passing over my chest and abdomen as I sat on the exam table. Her face changed slightly as she looked at the readings. Something flickered there, surprise? Confusion? "Hold still," she said, running the scanner over me again, slower this time. "What's wrong?" I asked, my pulse quickening. She didn't answer immediately, studying the screen for a moment longer before looking at me. "When was your last health check, Vane? Any unusual symptoms lately? Nausea, fatigue, anything like that?" I blinked, thrown off by the question. Sure, I've been tired, but that's normal, right? We're all exhausted." Moore's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not just exhaustion." She hesitated, then said, "Astra, you're pregnant." The words hit me like a shockwave, and for a moment, I couldn't process them. "What?" I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. That can't be right." But she nodded, her expression softening. "The scan's clear. You're about 8 weeks along." My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. 8 weeks. That meant my thoughts jumped back to a brief moment during some rare downtime, a night when I'd let my guard down with someone I trusted. My stomach turned, not from regret, but from the realization of how much everything had just changed. Does anyone else know?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. "No," Moore replied firmly. "And they won't unless you decide to tell them. But you need to take this seriously. Your body's under constant stress. It's not just about you anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Not just about me. I was used to being responsible for my team, for my squad mates' lives, but this was different. This was something fragile. Something that couldn't be fixed with stitches or medpacks. "I don't have time for this," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "There's a war out there, Moore. And you're part of it," she agreed. "But this isn't something you can ignore, Astra. If you keep pushing yourself, you're putting both of you at risk." The words, "both of you," struck a chord I hadn't expected. It wasn't just me anymore. As much as I wanted to brush it off, I couldn't. This wasn't a battlefield injury I could power through. It was life, new, untested, and entirely dependent on me. The following weeks were a blur of routine and introspection. I told no one, though it felt like Moore's words echoed in my head every time I suited up or ran drills. The team didn't notice the changes, my shifts in mood, the way I paced myself more carefully during missions, or how I avoided the heavier gear. But I noticed. Every time I felt the fatigue creeping in faster than before, every time my hand reflexively moved to my stomach when I thought no one was looking, I noticed. During one mission, the weight of it all nearly broke me. We were pinned down in a narrow alley, enemy fire raining down from the rooftops. My instincts screamed at me to take point, to lead the charge and break their line. But I hesitated. For the first time, I hesitated. "Vane, what the hell are you waiting for?" my squad leader barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. I gritted my teeth and moved, but the hesitation lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Was I putting my team at risk? Was I selfish for staying in the field when I had another life depending on me? Or was it selfish to even think about leaving when my team needed me? The firefight ended with minimal casualties, but as we regrouped, I caught my leader giving me a hard look. "You've been off lately," he said quietly when the others were out of earshot. "Something going on?" I shook my head. "Just tired." "It's nothing." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. For now. That night, I sat alone in the barracks, staring at the faint glow of my cybernetic hand as I flexed my fingers. I thought about the life growing inside me, about the world I was bringing it into, a world of war, decay, and constant danger. Was it fair? Was it even possible to keep something so pure alive in a place like this? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that I couldn't keep this secret forever. At some point, I'd have to choose, the mission or the life waiting to be born. And I had no idea which choice would break me more.